On her 8th day giving evidence, the woman who alleges she was raped by Irish international rugby players Paddy Jackson and Stuart Olding at Jackson's home in South Belfast in June 2016 was cross-examined by prosecution counsel Toby Hedworth. Mr. Hedworth told the complainant it was Paddy Jackson's case that he did not have sex with her on the night in question, but that he did have intimate contact with her. When asked her view on that, the woman alleged Jackson had sex with her on more than one occasion. The complainant was also asked about her contact with Stuart Olding, and she said she did not instigate anything with Mr. Olding. Evidence which had been heard earlier in the trial was also heard again, including details of text messages the complainant exchanged with friends following the alleged incident, and about her knowledge of rugby and of her interest in the game.
If you love this podcast, I'm sure you're looking for other great true crime podcasts to listen to. Wondery, the network behind this show, has other podcasts for you, especially if you love the way we tell stories here on Real Crime Profile. Great shows like Best Case, Worst Case, Locked Up Abroad, and Hollywood and Crime. All of them are amazing storytellers that you're going to love. So if you're looking for more variation in your podcast like true crime, entertainment, or audio dramas, they're all available from Wondery. Just head to apple.co/Wondery. That's apple.co/Wondery. Or if you're an Android user, head to Wondery.fm.
This has been a difficult time for all those involved in this trial. We have faith and trust in the legal system and respect the verdict. I would like to pay tribute to the young woman who had the resolve and confidence to come forward and put her faith in the police and criminal justice process. In addition to this, she was named on social media sites during the trial, contrary to her legal entitlement. Any breach of this entitlement is and will be investigated. This case has provoked comment and debate.
Hello and welcome to Real Crime Profile. This is Jim Clementi, retired FBI profiler, former New York City prosecutor, and writer-producer on CBS's Criminal Minds. And with me today is...
Laura Richards, criminal behavioural analyst, former New Scotland Yard, and founder of Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service.
And I'm Lisa Zambetti. I'm the casting director for CBS's Criminal Minds, where Jim Clementi is my dear colleague.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Lisa and Laura, and I think that this is going to be a very interesting but difficult episode.
Yeah, we have a real gallery of, I don't even know what to call them, of characters to talk about today. Laura?
Yeah, and certainly one of the cases that I saw blowing up on Twitter, and I think many people have reacted to, is the rape trial in Northern Ireland, and the conclusion of it last Wednesday. And 4 men on trial, 2 for rape. Those 2 were Paddy Jackson and Stuart Olding, and then Blaine McElroy and Rory Harrison were also on trial. One who was acquitted of exposure, and the other was found not guilty of perverting the course of justice and withholding information. And it was a trial of, 42 days long. There were 30 witnesses, and the victim ended up giving evidence for 8 days. 8 days is a long time. And certainly the fact that it was 4 defendants meant that there were 4 cross-examinations, and then obviously her own, or the prosecuting lawyer as well. And that in particular was something a lot of people have reacted to. And I guess, I certainly felt enraged seeing some of the things that were being reported on in terms of the evidence, certain aspects of it, like her underwear being passed around court. And I'd really like to sort of hear your view on it, Jim, and Lisa, just in terms of some of the detail of what happened. And the fact, it took the jury 3 hours and 45 minutes to reach its verdict.
Yeah, that's stunning. That is absolutely stunning. And I think nobody expected that.
So there's no one reason why the trial gripped people's attention. I think there's certainly the fact that the men's celebrity status is probably one obvious factor, and that's Jackson and Olding both play for rugby, for Ireland and Ulster. And Jackson was seen as having a bright future in the national squad. But I think it was much more than that in terms of, why it received so much coverage was the Twitterati army sort of took to Twitter because they were so incensed by certain aspects of the case, of this 9-week trial. And certainly the fact that the victim gave evidence for 8 days. And there were some key aspects relating to the medical evidence and the way that she was treated, as well as the text messages that were fairly incriminating, and yet there was a not guilty verdict. Now, rugby is a huge game in Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland and England, Wales, Scotland. And in fact, whilst this trial was going on, it was the Six Nations. I was getting up each Saturday morning to watch the rugby. It's a national event between England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, and also France. And we all play each other. And in fact, England and Ireland played in one of the last games, and this trial was going on in the background. And many people actually took to the streets. There's been many protests in Southern Ireland, in Dublin, as well as in Belfast, and various other places across Ireland, because people are just so outraged by what actually happened.
So these guys on this team, they're celebrities. I mean, they're like, the ballers that we know about in the States, and they're used to all kinds of privileges, I would imagine, and special treatment and everything.
Yeah, well, they're seen as, in their own state, they're seen as celebrities, as all international rugby players are well respected. It's a tough sport. They're paid relatively well, but when you compare them with footballers, footballers actually earn far more in terms of their earning value on a weekly basis. And rugby tends to be seen as a much more serious, sort of tougher game. Rugby players tend to not want to come off the pitch, even though their ears may be hanging off or certain, appendages that will still play on. But that's who they are, and they get kudos for playing hard and fast. And actually, it's rare to hear about these kinds of things. Certainly, it hasn't really been in the media, these kinds of things. I know certainly they've been going on, but this is the first time it's had mass exposure. And, there is an aspect here of bringing the game into disrepute. And I think there has just been officially ordered a review pending the findings of whether they did bring the game of rugby into disrepute. And apparently written into their contracts is that there's a code of conduct of the way that they must behave. And that's what this current investigation is looking at.
Oh, well, they don't have to look very far to see that they absolutely conduct unbecoming. It's not, how could it even be a question,
Well, Laura's right. I remember my brother Tim played rugby in college. He broke his collarbone in one play, and he wanted to keep playing. And, he had to be basically pulled out because they fancy themselves, real sportsmen, not like American football players that have all this protective equipment. These guys literally are banging heads and bodies together, slamming around, and they're sort of very, manly, let's put it that way. And I think that this kind of behavior probably was encouraged in a lot of ways. And I don't know that they're, obviously the way that they texted, and I know we'll go through that later, but the way they texted each other, they were bragging. They weren't hiding what they did. They were bragging about it. So I don't know. I don't have a lot of faith that they're going to just automatically say this was unsportsmanlike behavior.
Right.
Well, I think it's definitely going to be interesting. I went to Bath University, which was a big rugby university, and we used to actually, I played hockey, so in the university club, and we used to, go out with all the rugby guys, all the international players as well would come and train with us. And I have to say, the people who I met, the guys who I met who were playing for England were incredibly well behaved. They were a really nice bunch of guys. But that having been said, there was always this culture around, the hockey team and the rugby teams going out, and in terms of our own university teams. And, there was that laddish culture and certain things that the guys would do. But I think this is probably the first time it's really come under the media glare and the media spotlight. Mm-hmm. And certainly the texts that were passed back and forth, those in and of themselves are incriminating, and they are derogatory and demeaning and disgusting.
Yeah, they belie their defense 100%. I think those texts completely contradict what it seems like they were trying to defend. But
yeah, well, I mean, that's the defendant's text. I mean, but what's, I think, incredibly important is that the victim, the complainant in this case, I mean, she sent a very specific text, I mean, the very next morning, saying that what happened last night was not consensual. I mean, Lord, they didn't take that into account in the trial?
Well, I think they did take that into account from what I have read, but they seem to, for whatever reason, the jury came down on the fact that they couldn't say whether it was a consensual act or not. And perhaps it would help if we go through the detail of what the victim said. You know, we have to remember that the victim was 21. So, you know, she's young and she has found herself in a situation that escalated fairly rapidly. She's relatively young, and obviously there has been a lot that's been written about her online, and actually she's been named.
So she's supposed to be anonymous, but of course that somehow it got out her name. And do we know how that happened? Like who leaked it, or? Well,
even though we have, I mean, in the UK, the Youth Justice and Criminal Evidence Act was introduced in 1999, and it contained a raft of measures to protect vulnerable victims and witnesses, or as they're called, from the daunting aspects of the trial process. And there are things like special measures coming in. So, you know, a curtain being drawn across the witness box, or, you know, her being allowed to give evidence by video link. But actually she did give evidence in court where she was able to see the judge, the jury and the lawyers, but the rest of the room was obscured. But the issue here was that everyone else could see her.
What?
And there was a camera in the front of the box transmitting her evidence to a video screen placed in front of the dock and the public gallery. So yeah, everyone could see her. They knew her name, and people were tweeting.
Oh my God! That's totally what is the point of having the screen? Why? It's just ridiculous.
So she can't see who's in the courtroom, but they can see her. I mean, what kind of game of peekaboo is that? I don't even understand that.
Well, the point is for her not to, you know, be seen at all, really. That's what happens in the courts in England and Wales. You know, she shouldn't be seen at all, and she shouldn't be able to see or be intimidated by anyone in the court. But obviously these are some of the main problems that are being highlighted, because all of this took place in court number 12. Now in Northern Ireland, and I've spent a lot of time working there and, you know, understanding their culture, and actually, you know, this is a courtroom where, you know, majority of the time they'd have paramilitary trials. So the court was set up for those particular trials to take place, and there weren't protocols, and it certainly wasn't the court, you know, wasn't set up to deal with a vulnerable victim or witness of an alleged rape. So again, people are marching and voting with their feet because they just feel that the country, you know, is backward in terms of dealing with vulnerable witnesses. And of course, her anonymity has been breached by somebody who just decided to put out there, you know, what her name was. And now, unfortunately, her name's widely known and been shared on social media. So this has been a real challenge for this case. And she's not, sadly, the only one. There's been a number of other things that have happened on social media. So I think there's going to be some rulings coming out of this case. Of course, for her, it's more problematic because it's her life, and, you know, the way that she was treated, I think, is unconscionable.
So let's go back and just set the scene on what, you know, happened this night. And no matter where you live, whether you're in Ireland, the US, Australia, wherever you live, you are going to be able to identify with this just a typical night of a young, you know, woman going out, you know, with friends and enjoying herself. And then it goes very, very wrong. So Laura, do you want to describe her story?
Yeah, I'm going to describe it. I'm going to quote from an article by Conor Gallagher, who's from the Irish Times, who was actually there, and he was there at the time and was reported in an article for the Irish Times very eloquently events as they unfolded. And I think it's probably better to hear her words and to go direct to source to describe what happened. So in this article, and we'll post it in our show notes, and you can click on it and read it yourself, because there's a lot of very good information that we will comment on throughout this podcast. So he begins with, speaking confidently and precisely, she told the lead prosecuting counsel, Toby Hedworth QC, that on June the 27th, 2016, she had finished her exams and was going out to celebrate. She had a glass of wine in a friend's house before going to Ollie's nightclub, a venue attached to the Merchant Hotel in Belfast's fashionable Cathedral Quarter. There she met another group of friends, and at one stage they found themselves in the club's VIP area. It was a busy night. The Northern Ireland football team were in, fresh from the European Championships in France. Also there, although keeping a lower profile, were Jackson, Olding, McElroy and Harrison. Jackson and Olding were celebrating, having just returned from a tour of South Africa with the Irish squad. Outside the club, the woman ran into a friend of a friend and they got chatting. It was suggested that an after-party was happening. She did not recall hearing whose party it was or where it would be. The woman said she got into a taxi containing Jackson and 3 other women. According to her evidence, the taxi had been booked by someone else, but Jackson told the driver, "I'm Paddy Jackson," and the driver responded, "Get in." Jackson later said he would never do this. The woman said after arriving, she soon realised it wasn't much of a party, just some people dancing and drinking. She said she did not have a clear recollection, but at one point she went upstairs to Jackson's bedroom. There, at Jackson's instigation, the two kissed consensually, she said. He then tried to undo her trousers, but she told him she was not interested, and the two returned downstairs. She told counsel that shortly afterwards she decided to leave because she sensed the attitude had shifted at the party. She said McElroy was taking photographs and putting some of the women on his knee. She went looking for her bag, finding it upstairs in Jackson's bedroom. Jackson followed, she said, and grabbed her trousers, pulling them down to her knees. She said she froze as Jackson pushed her down on the bed, and with her tight trousers caught at her knees, she couldn't move. I was face down on the bed and he was having sex with me. Jackson knew she did not want it to happen, but he kept going, she said. Then the door opened and Olding walked in. My heart just sank. I knew what was going to happen. I looked Patrick Jackson straight in the eyes and said, "Please no, not him as well." By this stage, the woman was struggling to hold back tears in the witness box. She said the next thing she knew, her trousers were off and Jackson was having sex with her from behind while Olding was forcing her to give him oral sex. At this point, the door opened and she heard a female voice. The jury would later hear this was Dara Florence, a key witness in the case. The woman turned her head away because she feared, with all the photographs being taken downstairs, that she might be filmed. Jackson asked this other woman did she want to stay, but Florence said no and shut the door. Jackson then tried to force his entire hand into the woman, she said, adding that at this stage she was bleeding heavily from her vagina. Then McElroy entered the room completely naked and holding his penis as if he were masturbating, she told counsel. I thought this is not happening again, she said. She immediately got off the bed and grabbed her clothes. She put her trousers on and her underpants in her pocket. She said McElroy said to her, "You fucked the other guys, why won't you fuck me?" She told McElroy, "How many times does it take for a girl to say no for it to sink in?" She ran downstairs and Rory Harrison came out after her and asked, was she okay, she said. Harrison would have seen blood on her trousers, she said. He dropped her home in a taxi and soon after she got a message from him saying something like, "Keep my chin up," she said.
Sorry.
The following morning, she sent Harrison what turned out to be the most important text in the entire trial. What happened last night was not consensual. She also texted friends telling them she'd been raped by 3 Ulster fucking rugby scum, but refused to go to PSNI when they urged her. The PSNI is the police service of Northern Ireland. You just don't think they're going to believe you. I really did not want to take things further because you're so embarrassed. I did not want people finding out, she told counsel. She arranged to get the morning after pill because she said she did not know if a condom was used during the alleged assault. She also underwent a forensic medical examination. She said she thought the assault had prompted an early period, but that the doctor examining her told her she had an internal tear and that was why she was bleeding. The following day, she decided to go to the police. Explaining this decision, she said, "The more I thought about it, rape is a game of power and control. They rely on your silence. The only way you take the power back is when you actually do something about it. I may be preventing it happening to someone else. It could so easily have been my friends outside Ollie's. It could have been my sister outside. It was the best decision I made."
The court heard Paddy Jackson had 6 or 7 pints of Guinness and gin and tonic in a bar restaurant on the night in question, and he drank more alcohol in the club and back in his house. He said at the house party he was drunk, but wasn't falling around. Stuart Olding's evidence was beginning that afternoon he drank 8 tins of Carlsberg, 4 pints of Guinness, 2 gin and tonics, 5 vodka lemonades, 3 shots, and he got a beer from the fridge when back in Paddy Jackson's house.
So that's the text message, Jim. So the first disclosure, where she says, and first disclosure is always important. So She texted Harrison saying that what happened last night was not consensual, but she also texted her friends saying that she had been raped as well. So you've got 2 disclosures plus the one in the house, and then you have her calling the police as the 4th disclosure and getting medical help as well as a forensic medical examination. And those things are significant, aren't they, Jim?
Yeah, they are. Absolutely. I just want to ask, she said she was raped by 3 rugby players, but there were 4 defendants. Was that the 4th guy, the one that came in afterwards?
That's correct, yeah. So one came in wanting to have sex with her, and I believe he was half naked and masturbating. So he was actually charged with indecent exposure.
Huh. Okay. All right, so he wasn't charged with rape or attempted.
And the guy who took her home in the cab, who was telling her to keep her chin up, which was he charged, but he was just part of the trial as a witness, or?
So yes, Rory Harrison was the rugby player who went outside and took her home actually in a taxi, and she was hysterical apparently all the way home, and the taxi driver also corroborated that. And he was charged with perverting the course of justice and withholding information. Now, I believe he tried to delete some of the text messages because there was a lot of back and forth. So, for example, McElroy asked him in a text message, did you calm her? Did you calm her down, and where did she live? And Harrison immediately replied, mate, no joke, she was in hysterics. It's not going to end well. And he also texted her, I think, saying something like, keep your chin up, wonderful girl, or something like that, just as if it was something quite minor. But yes, they all, or there were questions about them wiping their mobile phones. I think one of them said that their phone broke. Another said that, that they had, their phone had got damaged, but they were all on a WhatsApp group. WhatsApp is a social media app, where you can talk back and forth instantly. And they had a group called Jack Home, which is the initials of all of their names together. And that was the same WhatsApp group where they were boasting about spit roasting the woman.
All right. I mean, so to, unfortunately get very graphic here, it means that is a way of bragging about somebody having sex with her from one end and somebody else having sex with her from the other end at the same time. And to say that, I mean, it's so demeaning. And again, it's this bragging. But at the same time, I mean, I don't understand how the jury has any kind of question about whether or not it was consensual when clearly the victim, had almost immediate outcry about it being non-consensual. I mean, isn't it the victim's consent that we're talking about? Isn't she the one that we would go to see if she consented to this sex act? And she clearly has stated, as you said, in 4 different places in a very short period of time, that it was non-consensual, that she was raped.
That's right. And that the words spit roasting, actually, Jim, became a point of contention in the trial, would you believe? The defense maintained that spit roasting could mean any sexual activity involving two men and a woman, while the prosecution suggested it very specifically means a woman penetrated orally and vaginally by 2 men at the same time.
And what are they saying it means other than that?
Right. I mean, the prosecution did hire a linguistic expert, who was versed in slang to write a report on the exact meaning of the word, although they never presented that in court. But obviously it just, again, they're trying to muddy the waters. And there were other messages as well. I just want to highlight these because it really does show the highly chauvinistic nature of these individual men in particular. And not just chauvinistic, but the patriarchy and just the way that they viewed women as objects. And one of them asked, any sluts get fucked? One friend asked Olding that day, and he replied, pumped a girl with Jacko on Monday, roasted her, then another on Tuesday night. McElroy texted another person, and love Belfast sluts, a text that McElroy had attached to a picture of Dara Florence and her two friends that was taken at the party. You know, Dara Florence was significant because she was the young woman who walked in.
Right.
Now, he gave her account, and, you know, she basically said that she was walking in on, you know, on a threesome, effectively, that she thought that it was consensual. However, you know, she had to concede that she couldn't say one way or the other if it was consensual. You know, there was no sign of positive consent. And of course, in terms of rape and sexual assault, the female has to give positive consent. It can't be that you're unconscious or not able to consent or that nothing is said. You have to seek positive consent.
So a couple things I just wanted to ask. So, you know, what does this term roasted mean, if not done something in a violent way? I mean, what else would it mean? And the other thing that comes to mind is that I really think it was Dara Florence's testimony that did her in, because to have another woman seeing another woman and not calling it rape and not thinking that there was anything wrong, that she should interfere or call the police. I mean, I can only imagine that went a long way with the jury in supporting the guys.
Yeah, what the hell? I mean, first of all, she said, didn't she just sort of walk in and walk out? Wasn't she asked if she wanted to say, and she said no, and she left? Didn't she turn her head away because she thought she was walking in on something sexual? So it's just her impression, and it doesn't take away what the victim said and it was doing and was absolutely expressed in very clear terms very shortly after. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's outrageous that they would put so much weight on a momentary bystander.
Do you think that the fact that she was not only being raped from behind, but that she was performing oral sex, you know, inverted commas, that the jury doesn't think that is possible, that you can't force somebody to give oral sex, that's just not something, you know what I mean?
I mean, it's very hard to say what's in the jury's mind, you know, when they're presenting evidence. And you know, I think the text messages are crucial in this particular case. And, you know, one of the messages that the complainant sent to Harrison straight afterwards was when he said, I think it was, keep your chin up, lovely woman. She basically said, to be honest, no, I know you must be mates with those guys, but I don't like them. And what happened was not consensual, which is why I was so upset. Again, thank you for taking me home. That was really appreciated. Now, just that text message on its own tells me a lot. You know, it's 5 or 6 lines, but the fact that she's so polite and sort of is acquiescing but still making the point that it was not consensual, but kind of excusing it in another way, because sadly women feel that somehow they are to blame in situations like this. So you can see even in that message, she's still not 100% sure what she's going to do with it. She's still being polite to Harrison, but she's made it clear that it wasn't a consensual act. And I think that those 4 disclosures, I mean, if you had an expert to be able to give evidence about how rape victims behave and what goes through their minds, certainly when an assault happens, and actually this was an early report, I think that's significant, because you don't tend to see, in most rapes, you don't tend to see you know, serious injury, serious physical injury, because sadly the very act of it means that some people will completely freeze and they just want to get it over with. It might be freeze, it might be fight, or it might be flight, but majority of people freeze and they want to get it over with. So in this case, you had conflicting medical evidence. One medical examiner for the prosecution said that she did have a laceration to the vaginal wall and that she was bleeding. I believe it was a 1 centimeter tear, because he did try and insert his whole fist into her vagina.
God.
Oh, jeez.
That to me, you know, tells me a lot about what was going on. And second to that, well, they did have a defense expert say, well, you couldn't tell whether she was menstruating. But they handed around her knickers. So to your question, Jim, they handed around her knickers in court to look at the level of, of how much blood was actually on them. So I believe there was blood on her underwear as well as on her trousers. And I think corroborated by the taxi driver who said that she was distressed and that there was blood on her clothing.
But I mean, the description that you read, it said that she put her underwear in her pocket and put on her trousers. But I mean, so if that's the case, there wouldn't have been a lot of blood. But when you said they were handed around the courtroom, who were they handed to?
I think it did say in the article that they were handed around the lawyers for them to inspect. I don't think it was they were handed around to the jury. I'd have to check.
Anyway, in answer to your question, though, earlier, Lisa, where you said, where people would say, like, because she was in the middle of oral sex with one of the guys that this woman who walked in would think that it was all consensual, but it's extremely common for rapists to also force oral sex. It is not at all uncommon, and it can in fact be forced. And I remember a goofy thing that one reporter once said to a woman, like, why didn't you just bite him? And you're in the middle of being raped. You're obviously in fear of the people that are doing it. I mean, rugby players are notoriously strong and violent. And to have two of them decide to have sex with you against your will, I mean, there's no way you're going to fight them off. So I wish that people wouldn't just try every excuse possible to find against a woman who is victimized like this.
Right. And just looking, Jim, yes, I'm looking at a text that I was sent, and it was also put on Twitter. So she had a 1 centimeter laceration, vaginal laceration. There was blood on her trousers. There was the victim's blood on the defendant's duvet. The taxi driver saw blood on the victim's trousers. The taxi driver checked seats for soilage and found that the victim was inconsolable in the back seat. The taxi driver also heard that Harrison was talking in code on the phone whilst in the car. And it says that the victim's knickers were passed around the court, but it doesn't say to whom. But I think that's a very valid point, that she didn't put her underwear back on. So you wouldn't expect to see blood on her underwear if that's what they were examining her underwear for. And perhaps that's exactly what they were doing. And then...
Yeah, but that makes no sense. Physically, you wouldn't expect it to be there. So the lack of it doesn't prove anything.
But I certainly don't recall any cases where where victims' underwear is handed around a courtroom for people to look at. I mean, that act in and of itself just sounds, I don't know what purpose it was to serve. And obviously we'd have to look at how these things were done and what was being put forward, how it was presented, whether there were any slides being shown. I know that at one point they were going to show her vaginal examination because of the conflicting accounts from the medical professionals. And that, to me, was a question mark about their process and their procedures.
And what was the conflict between the two professionals? I mean, I know that the one who had examined her had said that she had a vaginal tear. What was what did the other professional say? I mean, what was his reasoning for?
Yeah, so the prosecution had an expert who said, and she was the original doctor who examined her on her first disclosure, and did the forensic medical examination. She said that she was still bleeding when she went to the clinic the next day, and that she found a vaginal tear. I believe it was 1 centimeter, a vaginal tear, and that's where the bleeding emanated from. But defense called another expert who looked at some pictures, and they opined the extent of the injuries, and he, I believe, said that it was not possible to determine where that blood came from. Whether it came from an injury rather than from menstruation was something that he believed that you could not state with any confidence.
I thought there was a difference between menstrual blood and
absolutely
a wound bleeding. And how is that person giving that testimony?
I think that's the real nub of the fact that they're not geared up to deal with rape cases because they don't understand the process. And equally, it says that both doctors disagreed on the injuries to such an extent that at one stage there was concern the video of the vaginal examination would have to be shown to the jury. In the end, this was avoided and the conflicts were dealt with through the doctor's evidence. Overall, the medical evidence was of little benefit to jurors one way or the other. Both doctors agreed the injuries did not prove penile penetration or a lack of consent. Furthermore, most sexual assaults do not result in injury, Dr. Hall said. I mean, it's puzzling and it's troubling. And, it goes on. The DNA evidence was similarly unhelpful. Olding's DNA was found in several places, but this was largely consistent with his evidence that he ejaculated after the oral sex.
But didn't they find DNA in her wouldn't that prove penile penetration in her vaginal canal and all that?
Yeah, but what they're saying is that, that it's unhelpful because it basically doesn't tell you about consent. And I think all of these parts, it's not one thing on its own. It's all of these parts, including the text messages. It's everything together and asking the right questions. And it sounds to me that perhaps they didn't have the right experts and the right questions being asked. And certainly, the 4 lawyers, I believe 3 of them had no experience of rape trials at all for the defendants and were constantly interrupting and asking questions because they didn't understand the process. And that's what caused a lot of the delays. And some of that played into the defendant's favor from what I can gather and what I've read.
First of all, the most important evidence here, I think, is the fact that when she got home, she wrote back to one of the guys that morning saying that it wasn't consensual. She wrote to her friends saying she was raped, identifying those people. Are you telling me they took the stand and said they did not vaginally penetrate her or orally penetrate her? Wasn't there a witness that said she saw that happening? What you read to me was that they didn't prove vaginal penetration.
That's right. I mean, Dara Florence did say and did testify that he was penetrating her from what she could see. I don't think
they didn't deny that they had sex. I mean, they just classified it as.
Well, Laura, could you read those findings again because I thought it said that they didn't prove sexual intercourse.
Yeah, that's exactly what you read, that they couldn't prove penile penetration. But I don't think the guys aren't.
Yeah. If they admitted it, then why do they have to prove it? I mean, that should be proof beyond any doubt. When the defendants have been questioned on the stand, if they say they did actually do the act, then they shouldn't have any further need to prove anything.
So basically their entire defense was that she was just one of a bunch of fangirls who came over to their place and this is all consensual. And
well, that's what they were trying to say. Now, the 4 defendants had a meeting the next day. They all met up for lunch and it seems that 2 of them got their stories straight and 1 of them didn't. So actually, to Jim's point, that was a key point of the trial of whether there was penile penetration or not. Now, one of them said that when he opened the door to Jackson's room, he saw the woman straddling Jackson and kissing him, i.e. she was, positively engaged in the act, shall we say. I believe that one of them, forgot what the story was. So there were questions around that. And the other 3 were trying to say that there wasn't penile penetration with her. So, yes, that was an important point at the trial.
And the jury found they didn't prove penile penetration.
No, they didn't prove. They didn't prove rape. I mean, that's what the jury said.
Yeah, so there was a not guilty for the 2 counts of rape, for the 1 indecent exposure, and then for Harrison withholding information and perverting the course of justice. Now, just reading it, actually, the key text that apparently he didn't provide and that got deleted was that one where she said that it was not consensual. So that was brought up as well.
He erased that?
He erased that, yes.
Well, that's an indication of guilt, isn't it, or something? I mean,
certainly their behavior, on the face of it, the fact that there are these messages going back and forth, that Harrison is saying that she is in hysterics and it wasn't going to end well. They then all meet the next day. They have various discussions. Three of them come up with the same account, but one of them gets the account wrong. The fact that messages are then deleted. I mean, it certainly looks like they were all circling the wagons and trying to get their stories straight. And four of them versus one of her, does it just come down to a numbers game? Of a he said, she said. But it certainly sounds to me, from the facts, that this meeting and getting together at a cafe the next day to circle the wagons, it sounds like that there is a form of cover-up there.
There is no room in society for tolerance of sexual crime, and we understand how difficult it can be for someone to report a rape. But let me assure you today that if you choose to speak to police, you will be listened to, respected, treated sensitively, have your report thoroughly investigated, and you will be signposted to support services such as Nexus and Victim Support, among others.
So what do you guys make of all this? As far as, do you think the jury was really believed that they were innocent of this, or they just looked the other way? Or, I mean, it doesn't sound possible that this jury could believe the defendants, but somehow they didn't. I mean, what is going on here just collectively, do you think?
Well, first of all, it's a system, right? And, look, it's probably similar to what goes on in Hollywood when a star is, tried for a violent crime or any crime, or, in politics or anywhere else. When somebody is, one of the people that other people look up to, they don't want to see the bad side, and they want to find whatever excuse they can to get them off. I mean, it's very difficult to convict somebody who's famous. And, sounds like these guys are local heroes, playing rugby. And that's a very important sport to them. So that's what it seems like to me.
But I mean, Laura, do you think that they're stuck, the community is stuck in the past with some kind of latent misogyny that a good girl doesn't go home with, a good girl knows when the party is turning, a good girl, you know what I mean?
I mean, for me, it's my belief that the CSI effect weighs in here on cases like this, as well as the celebrity, for rugby guys, who are seen as local heroes and seen as celebrities. But I do think that people want to see, physical evidence. They want to see injuries. They want to see the sign of a fight. They want to see some, very clear markers that it's a violent rape. And of course, most rapes do not follow that pattern. Evidence, that's presented, I think sometimes people put weight on the wrong things. Where she was badgered over those 8 days by 4 different lawyers, one in particular who said that she just seemed to be reciting lines from Law and Order, and just quoting lines out of various crime shows when she was giving evidence. And, I just think that so much is culturally rooted over there, in terms of where they've come from, and trying to get up on public protection and matters around domestic violence and rape. I've quoted a number of cases from over there where we've seen, horrific and brutal domestic violence murders. And then you've seen, months or a year sentence handed out. So culturally, there are big problems around gendered violence in particular, but I do think the CSI effect weighs in. And when you've got legal arguments sort of muddying the water, and this was a trial that went on for a long time, and a jury that are, perhaps tired, and the legal arguments maybe, became too much as well for them, that they didn't see the wood through the trees for what the important evidence was. And it's having an expert, somebody being able to point out in its context, the text messages, how a victim of rape may behave after they've been raped, the disclosure aspects, the fact that she disclosed to 4 five separate individuals within a 24-hour period. That is significant. The taxi driver and those things are incredibly significant. And
yeah, it's an independent eyewitness indicating what her behavior was when she was leaving moments after this happened. I mean, there was no, conspiracy. Hey, let's, after the fact, I want to go after these guys to, make money or do this or do that or hurt them. No. And in fact, like you pointed out, Laura, in one of those texts, she was quite polite, but very specific about the lack of consent. And that's a consistency across all these disclosures. And I just can't believe that jurors were so ignorant in disbelieving that.
Right, and that's what people have reacted to. I mean, the judge reserved her final words for the jurors, thanking them for their time and their commitment and excusing them from further service for life. And she said this has probably been the most difficult trial that any jury in Northern Ireland has had to sit on. And I mean, we don't know all the ins and outs of exactly went on across those days, but I would imagine so much of it came down to legal arguments with, when you've got 4 defendants, 4 lawyers, as well as the prosecution. I think they probably got so tied up, on legal wrangling that they lost the key. There's no Perry Mason moments, are there, in trials like this, Jim? I think some juries and, people are expecting that moment where suddenly it all makes sense, the Colombo moment or the Perry Mason moment, as I call it. And actually these trials can be difficult to follow and work out where, those key light bulb moments are of what really went on. And I think the water was just muddied. And I think it's
right.
So disappointing and soul destroying. I mean, what that victim now must be going through, which is why the whole Twitterati came in with hashtag I believe her, and people marched on it. You vote with your feet. And then, astoundingly, Paddy Jackson then had filed a civil suit against a senator over there because he had tweeted his view about the acquittal. And so a civil suit is now following. And people of Twitter took to Twitter again of hashtag sue me too, Paddy Jackson, of also saying that they believed her, because Paddy Jackson's camp was saying that anybody who said that they believed that she was raped, and I believe her, supporting her, that they would look to start a legal case against them.
But as well as I do, Laura, that the evidence in this case was so much stronger and plentiful than evidence we see in most rape cases. First of all, the fact that there was a physical injury, that's very rare. The fact that there were 2 eyewitnesses, one, a woman who basically walked in on this and saw the sex act, so we know they were engaging in a sex act. The victim made an almost immediate outcry, and she repeated that a number of times. She was very specific about it, the fact that there was no consent. And on top of that, you have traffic going back and forth between the defendants bragging about it. I mean, this is overwhelming. I mean, you don't get any of this. Normally, it's just what the victim says and what she describes versus what the defendant says or doesn't say. And so in a case like this, to have so much very strong evidence on the part of the prosecution, to see this, I don't know.
And the sad thing is that she knew that this was the road that she knew that this was going to happen this way, because one of her other texts is, I'm not going to the police. I'm not going up against Ulster Rugby. Yeah, because that'll work. I mean, it's such a rueful kind of sentiment and it absolutely came true.
Basically, in terms of the evidence that we've seen, and certainly what Jim has just given a sort of a synopsis of, it does sound like there was overwhelming evidence. And the I Believe Her campaign, I think, is very strong on Twitter. And we wouldn't want it to detract from women coming forward, because I have heard that amongst the domestic violence charities that that's what's happening. And, I think that this is against the Me Too backdrop, that this is a time to pressure for change. And, the activists out there, this is the time to push really hard. And, I'm certainly undertaking some work in Northern Ireland. I'm going to be out working over there on April the 18th and 19th, and I'm still pushing for law change on coercive control and the stalking offence. And this is the time to push harder. So I hope that it does lead to more public outcry and to a review of the criminal justice system so that victims and witnesses are better protected.
I mean, it's so disappointing when a victim does take the very difficult decision to go forward and push the criminal prosecution, and then the system just lets them down like this. I mean, and then to embolden these guys who, just with their disgusting behavior.
Oh, yeah. It's not going to change their behavior at all. They know they can get away with it. And it's probably not the first time.
Well, it's not, because they were bragging, braggosaurus about spit roasting other women. And that's the point, isn't it? Getting away with it. They'll be out celebrating their victory. Sadly, there will be other women. And now they're calling for anonymity so that rape suspects are not named. And that's what happens in Southern Ireland. But of course, as we know, and we've discussed that before, that it means that, serial predators, we need to unmask them and make it clear who they are so that other victims can come forward. So I really hope that doesn't have a negative impact. And, we have to do more to call out serial perpetrators, not less. And I'd like to see us moving forward, not moving backwards. Because I do want to just make comment. I saw an article in the Times yesterday. The Commissioner, Cressida Dick, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service, had written an article, basically said that no longer will the police just give a blanket belief to all victims of sexual violence. And I got to say, I read it a number of times because I couldn't believe that article had been published, particularly in light of how many times we've had failures. We were only recently talking about war boys, weren't we? Hundreds and hundreds of victims who just were not believed. And, that's exactly the point. The police should have an open mind when they're investigating sexual abuse, but the historic problem has been that they didn't. They were too quick to look for undermining evidence and slow to examine the suspect's account and put the perpetrator at the centre of the investigation, and to look for things that may strengthen the case. And so I don't want to see a cultural shift that, we've gone 10 steps forward and now we take 20 back. That is a real concern. We currently have a 6.7% conviction rate for rape in England and Wales.
6.7?
6.7, yeah, just under 7%. So we have a culture of perpetrators getting away with it. In Northern Ireland, it's even less. And so that is a major problem. So to have an article saying that they won't just carte blanche believe victims, is, for me, unconscionable. The police, yes, they must have an open mind, but too often they start from a position of not believing them. And that's what we're trying to change with the I Believe Her campaigns, and putting victims, our podcast, putting the victim's voice at the centre of what we do because of that low conviction rate and victims being believed.
Laura, even when they don't get away with it, the penalties are so mild. It's ridiculous. When Laura brought up this Irish case for us to talk about, for some reason my mind jumped to Brock Turner, who, for those of you who may remember, was a Stanford University student who he was found guilty on 3 felony counts: assault with the intent to commit rape, sexual penetration with a foreign object of an intoxicated person, and sexual penetration with a foreign object of an unconscious person. And he was sentenced to 6 months, and he only served 3 months. And now the latest news is he's trying to get a new trial.
I mean, the audacity of that, the audacity to file an appeal for a new trial when he got off so lightly, and what he did is just unbelievable.
Well, I'm just wondering, maybe it would be good if he got a new trial. Wouldn't he be subject to being resentenced?
You'd hope. I mean, the prosecutor actually recommended he serve 6 years, you'll recall, and the judge completely disregarded that 6-year recommendation and completely disregarded the victim's impact statement. Do you remember? We read out aspects of it, and it was completely disregarded.
And his own father said, he shouldn't have to suffer just for trying to get some. Get some. He assaulted a woman who was unfucking conscious. I mean, anyway, so that.
But don't forget, the judge went to the same college as them. I hate to think that weighed in, but I do believe that probably was a key aspect.
Yeah.
He was a swimming star at the school, wasn't he? And what they're trying to use in this appeal is that, well, he's of good character. As if that matters in a rape trial, right? It's not like you're trying to prove his credibility or not. It comes down to the fact, did he try and gain consent from a victim? Well, we know in this case she was unconscious. So she could never have given consent. And the impact that it had on her was profound and significant. And I recall us reading out her statement. It was haunting.
Well, fortunately, I don't think that he's going to get very far with that. And also the judge who gave him such a light sentence is really getting pounded by the community, and they want to recall him and all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, that's something.
Well, quite right, too. They should be looking at his background and where he went to college. That doesn't feel comfortable to me at all, that little network behind the scenes.
Yeah, I've seen that before, where a judge went to the same school as the defendants, and a university is something that you have an allegiance to, you have affiliation with for the rest of your life. And so there should be some measure of whether or not that person is still involved in that school, how much they're involved in alumni association and so forth before they can sit as a judge, because I think, in some cases they should probably be conflicted out.
Absolutely. It makes sense. You have to look at those networks and those connections. And certainly, why a judge would disregard the recommendation of 6 years and the victim impact statement. I just think that there are grounds to question that sentence. And particularly because it received such a groundswell, didn't it? I mean, again, people were so, were angry about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it took two bystanders to save her, basically, to get this kid off of her. Anyway, so there we are.
Brock Turner, and then the last one to round it up was, I noticed today, the BBC, they had an article, BBC Three, about the documentary that they released. This is over in the UK, on somebody that we have discussed a couple of times, actually, R. Kelly, and that new allegations have been discovered in this documentary. And of course, he's had a 30-year career, hasn't he? And there have been multiple allegations across his career. He's now 51.
Well, didn't he just have I think he just had a new album drop, didn't he? I feel like I just heard that. I just don't understand it. I don't get it.
Well, he needs to put it on mute. I mean, why this keeps happening? He's 51. This has been going on for over 30 years. And apparently, it's common knowledge that he likes these young girls and have people pick out the young girls that he then sexually coerces and then he rapes. And of course, he married a 15-year-old, didn't he? His protege, Alia. Yeah.
But here's the thing. I mean, obviously, there's a new documentary coming out about this, and hopefully it will give people a little more insight into what he's like. But the fact is that it's sort of like there are people like Michael Jackson who people just, they will not see past his celebrity or his artistic talent. OJ, there's still plenty of people who think OJ didn't do anything. I mean, he's not been convicted of the murders, but he was held civilly responsible for murdering Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. And yet people will believe that he did nothing because they love his celebrity, because he has some kind of charisma or something. And it's just so annoying when people will let people like R. Kelly, he's on film doing degrading things to what's obviously a young girl. He's paid off a bunch of other girls and women, who've made claims against him. The fact that he's wealthy is insulating him, and it's just sick. I'm so tired of seeing this kind of thing where people, just because he happens to be a talented artist, it doesn't mean that he is not taking advantage of girls and women.
Well, yeah, no, his label, RCA, needs to drop him. Drop him. And the other artists, many, many artists who are on that label also need to be brave and come forward and say enough.
Right. People not collaborating with him and people putting him on mute. Don't buy his music. Don't download his music. That's where you got to hit these people, right? Stop from his label and stop going to his concerts and stop paying. Listen to
and if you have his music, break it up into little pieces and take a picture of it and post it on Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat. Show how disgusted you are with this kind of behavior. I mean, he is clearly somebody who has had repeated criminal allegations against him about taking advantage of girls and women. Why would you want to associate with somebody like that? Why?
That's a real rogues gallery today, but
yeah, I know. It's just a confederacy of idiots. But should we end on an up note? Should we give people our CrimeCon?
Yeah, well,
you want to talk to us about this in person?
CrimeCon is just around the corner, so we want to make sure as many of our listeners come and see us in Nashville. And in fact, there's a fantastic lineup of different speakers. I think Dateline speakers have just been confirmed. And I believe Mr. Clementi is giving a talk on serial killers. And
and Laura Richards.
Yep, I'll be giving a talk on preventing murder in slow motion and can you identify the high-risk warning signs? And we're going to be doing a podcast, are we not? The three of us.
We are. We're doing a live podcast live from CrimeCon Nashville. And we'll be doing a meet and greet with anybody who wants to come and meet us and talk to us. And we will also be doing an immersive experience where we will take people through an interrogation process, and it's really exciting. So we got lots in store. There's lots of great speakers, and there's going to be some special events for VIP guests and also for everybody else. And I can't wait. It was so much fun last year.
It was so much fun and great to put, faces to names. And we got to, it was so great to meet you guys. And I look forward to meeting even more friends that we've gained, in this last year. And maybe we could sneak out and hear some music and get some barbecue. I don't know. Don't tell Jim and Laura that we might have a field trip.
Well, there's an event on Saturday night that it's going to be out at the White Horse, I believe, and it's going to be a big event, and I think everybody can come, and it should be very, very fun. It's a secret what we'll be doing, but I can tell you it's going to be fun.
And I can't wait to go to Nashville. It'd be my first time there. So I'm super excited. And people like Laura Petler will be there, and Jim Fitzgerald, and Bobby Chacon.
Is Bob Ruff?
Bob Ruff will be there.
Oh, my Bobbies.
Bob will be there. So if you want to come along, and we'd love to see you, and we'd love to hang out with you, you can use our Real Crime Profile discount, which is RCP Profile, but it's only with one P. So RC Profile, and you get a 10% discount of the standard badges. So I think the VIPs have already gone, haven't they, Jim? The VIPs and the golds, but there's still standard badges left. So please come and hang out with us in Nashville.
It'll be great.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Laura, for giving us all that information on this case, because it's good to know what's happening on the other side of the pond. And it's good to know that people have sort of risen up in protest for what happened in this case and in support of this woman who was victimized. And I hope that people continue to do that. That's how people should behave, not like these offensive, quote, athletes.
Hear, hear.
That's right. We've got to hold these people to account, and suffice to say that we shine a light on these cases, but there's still another process to take place, and that's the rugby investigation, the review that they will look at to see whether their behaviour did bring the sport into disrepute. So I believe a couple of the other rugby players have commented on it and said that it doesn't bode well for them, and I really do hope that they take this very seriously, because there may have been an acquittal, but of course acquittal does not mean innocence. It means that the burden of proof wasn't met, but of course there is another investigation process, and it's through their own body, and I think that this is going to be a very important review. So thank you for jumping on and discussing it with me, and I think it's a very disturbing case, and certainly, we're in 2018, we're not in 1975, and it just kind of had that very bizarre of stepping back in time. So I really hope that we see some change from this case. So thank you both, and thank you everyone for listening to us. This is Real Crime Profile signing out.
I wish I didn't have to be here. I've been on marches like this in O'Connell Street since the 70s. I'm a founder member of the Women's Liberation Movement. We're all angry and heartbroken. We need justice. We need a debate in Ireland about consent and about relationships between men and women, and when no means no, and how you recognise no.
It's just been the case that men feel that they can dispense with consent. I'm here today because, I just asked the question, how can you expect any woman to go and report her rape or her attack after seeing what happened to that girl?
The thing that brought me here was the text, the WhatsApp group, those disgusting toxic masculine messages. I saw those and it just makes me feel sad for the woman and for anyone who's been through that. I just don't think it's right.
Feeling really angry, really disappointed, frustrated at the system. It's ridiculous. Everything needs to change. You need to change the misogyny in Ireland. You need to change the whole culture of even talking about women like that. We need to change the justice system, the way we define rape in the courts. It's absolutely ridiculous.
So I'm just standing in solidarity with women, especially young women who find themselves in this situation.
At the same time, I know people that have been in similar situations. I know. I just want to give my support as a woman.
We stand with her! We stand with her! We stand with her! We stand with her! We stand with her!
If you like our podcasts, there are a few things you can do. You can take 2 minutes and go to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. You can also check out all Real Crime Profile offers and promotions and our sponsors in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go to Facebook and like our Facebook page, and you can also follow us on Twitter at Real Crime Profile without the E. And one last thing, please tell your friends, family and colleagues about us and spread the Real Crime Profile word. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate all of our listeners.
Real Crime Profile is produced and edited by Paul Francis Sullivan. Sound engineering by Mike Thal. Music is composed by Simba Tsumba. Logo art by Jim Clementi. Real Crime Profile is produced by XG Productions and distributed by Wondery.
For advice and support if you're experiencing stalking in the UK, you can contact Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service on 0203 866 4107, or you can go to the website where there's a lot of information and advice that you can follow on www.paladinservice.co.uk. If you're experiencing domestic abuse, you can call the National Domestic Violence Helpline for free on 0800 2000 247. In the US, if you're experiencing domestic abuse and need advice, shelter or counselling, you can call Genesis, the 24-hour hotline, on 214-946-4357. You can also go to their website for further advice or support, www.genesisshelter.org. And there's the domestic violence hotline on 800-799-7233.